the Bible is very full of the warts and the failings of the heroes, which is what makes it such a true book, because it doesn't paint them with one broad stroke of, I mean, we see Elijah's depression. We see John the Baptist questioning. We see Samson's failures. We see David's mistakes. There's not one individual that passes through all of this without us seeing all that they went through. And so it's hopeful in that, because it gives us hope that we can be real.
Welcome, everyone. Today we are joined by a man of God that I am blessed to know and have looked up to since I first met him in 2010, Brother Keith Sjostrand. He is the pastor of Christian Apostolic Church in Newark, Ohio, and has served as a psychologist in the public and private sector for a number of years. We had a fascinating conversation about his life and ministry, his advice to young leaders, how the Apostolic Church should approach mental health, and much more. Well, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us today, Brother Sjostrand.
Thank you, Brother Hackathorn. It's an honor to be here and to be with you from each side of the globe.
Yeah, it's actually a lot easier now that we're into daylight savings. We could do it more around noon my time, and that's in the evening for you, but I'm glad we were able to match up calendars. You're a busy man. You just finished up a week at General Conference and back in Ohio and celebrating, you said, I think we were just talking about it, your 65th birthday yesterday?
That's correct. Absolutely. Turned 65. So in the U.S., that's kind of a transition where you are now eligible to retire. So I haven't yet, but now that thought is always looming in my mind.
Well,
More so than ever.
If it was Sister Sjostrand on the podcast and she had a birthday, we probably wouldn't bring it up. But, since us blokes, we don't really care too much about our age.
No worries. And, obviously at some point, I don't know that anybody fully gets to retire, especially when you are involved in ministry. You simply find a new avenue in which to serve, find a new way in which to serve.
Yeah, that is so true. And I'm really looking forward to chatting with you today about ministry and different aspects of your ministry in particular. But I like to start out these conversations by getting to know the guest a little bit for those who may not know you. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your background, your worldview, that sort of thing. Thank you, Brother
Sure,
Joshua.
absolutely. I was born in the U.S. in sort of the central area, actually the South, and yet my folks, my mother was from the South in Louisiana, and my dad was from St. Paul, Minnesota. They met at Bible school, one of our Bible schools, Apostolic Bible Institute, which was sort of a popular place for young people to meet.
Yes,
And
yep.
my dad was, I guess, technically first generation. After he received the Holy Ghost, his mother received the Holy Ghost, and then he found out that he had a grandmother that had received the Holy Ghost. There was a strong presence of the Holy Ghost in Europe and in Sweden. We were Swedish.
Yep.
My mother was not first generation. She happened to have been third generation herself. Her grandfather and her mom and dad, and then she was born into this. So it was kind of like that was about all we knew growing up, although I had family on both sides that were either Lutheran or Catholic or something. Um, During the year I was born in 1957, um, most people had a church connection of some sort, which I know is not the case as much today, but
Yeah.
people considered themselves a member of a church or affiliated with a church. And so, of course, mine was unique in that I grew up in a minister's home. My dad started home mission work, started a church in southern Missouri, pastored in Illinois, then moved to Arkansas and took a church and was pastoring there. When I, where I sort of, that was where I received the Holy Ghost, and it's where I began to feel the burden of being involved in ministry.
Mm.
Um, Although for me, growing up in a minister's home, I saw people, the underbelly of what
Mm.
ministry was, meaning
Yeah.
you try to help and people get mad or they falsely accuse you or they get whatever. And so I went through my own period of, I don't really want to be involved in ministry at
Mm.
all. I would rather just make money and go to school, and I'm not interested in Bible school. And I had not, I guess the word backslidden to the point where I was out of the church and doing things inappropriate, but I just didn't want to be involved in
Mm.
ministry.
Yeah.
And I went to my folks, and I had received a scholarship to a fairly prestigious undergraduate. I was going pre med. And so I began my journey in college in 1975 on a pre med track and did well. But that year away from home, sort of away from people telling me, oh, you're going to be a preacher, et cetera,
Yeah.
the Lord really dealt with me. And I saw the underbelly of education, if you will.
Mm.
There were just as many jealousies and cliques and frustrations and in the university. And
Yeah.
so, it was like, oh, wow, you don't escape it. I
Mm.
thought, you know, well, if you got into this thinking, you would, or this field, people would be nice.
Yeah,
People
you
would
wouldn't have to deal with
fall.
people.
Exactly. But guess what? You have to deal with them anywhere you go. And so that was real eye opening. And I know I read a few books. One was by Gene Edwards, The Tale of Three Kings, and
Mm.
by a book by Francis Schaeffer, How Should We Then Live? And these were not apostolic necessarily writers, but they had a lot of writings that dealt with philosophy and worldviews and some of those things. So it sort of solidified my faith, if you will. And even though I was living on campus, I came home to church at least Sunday morning every week and stayed involved, and then started kind of teaching in one of our youth classes. And then after a year of being there, I basically came to my dad and said, I feel like the Lord's really calling me. I need to pursue
Mm.
serving him through ministry and preaching and something helping in that line. And I'm ready to quit school and go to Bible school and become an evangelist. And
Wow.
he said, "Oh no, you started this. You have a scholarship. and the Lord opened this door. You need to go forward with it.
Mm.
And
Very wise.
I was like, oh wow, are you kidding me? Nobody is going to college, and so I at that time, and so I went. Uh, Ironically, later that year, that summer, I met the lady that would be my wife, and
Oh, wow.
we started then going to school together, and we both graduated together. We got married. We got married very young, and we both went to college and went to undergraduate, and then finished that, and then evangelized for a couple of years, and then we took a home missions church that was just had about 4 or 5 members, pastored there for about a year and a half, during which time the Lord opened numerous doors um, for my wife to sing at. She opened for Ray Charles, and she
Wow.
did a lot of things while we were pastoring that little church. And so it was like um, things were going well. Uh, the reason we kind of evangelized was I developed nodules on my vocal cords, and it was like you have to go into vocal rest. And
Mm.
so, again, I had no place really job, and so consequently went back to the university, finished a master's, finished a specialist degree, became a psychologist. My wife was teaching at the time, taught Spanish and English, kind of supporting us and helping us and through financially. And then she went back and got her doctorate, master's, and then doctorate through the university. So then we joined with my father, helping there in the church and involved in pastoral duties for several years. And then about 19 years ago, came to Ohio, left both sets of our family, which were living there in the South at that time,
Mm-hmm.
um, and took the church here in Newark, where we have been, for the last 19 years, where basically
Wow.
our children were born in Arkansas, but our uh, both girls have now gotten married in Ohio, and one of them
Mm.
married somebody from down under,
Yeah, from Perth. It was good
from
seeing
Perth.
you
That's right.
a couple months ago for the wedding.
Yeah,
Uh,
and thank
that
you
was an
for
amazing
doing that.
event. Oh, of
It was
course.
great to have your family and your wife, and of course mother-in-law and sister-in-law and brother-in-law and all of you. It was a great celebration.
Yeah, it was wild. It was like worlds colliding. We had people from the Gold Coast, from Singapore, from Sydney, from Newark, Ohio.
From
It was really
Adelaide
cool.
or
From
from
Adelaide, yeah,
Adelaide. Yep,
yeah, it
we
was
were
really
all
cool.
there. It was amazing. And
Now,
during that time, and I probably should not gloss over it, but during that time, obviously served our organization in a lot of different capacities.
hmm,
Served as
yeah,
youth leaders for the section and on the youth board, and served in different capacities, as well as um, later have served as executive presbyter and served on our district board in different capacities. And basically, as the Lord opened doors,
yeah,
doing your best to walk through them and being prepared. I know sort of one of the favorite verses was that often I remembered was your gift, will make room for you. And
mm,
so sometimes it's that sense of being prepared,
yeah,
and how then the Lord will utilize that, and kind of in
yes,
that difference between Peter and Paul, who was very studied and very learned in Greek and some of the languages, you know, while they both started churches, none of the churches they started remain
mm, yeah,
today.
true.
But the letters that Paul wrote, which he was a more prolific writer, are what we use today, you know, more than anything else. Obviously, the words of Simon Peter, but he only wrote a small book. And so you can see how, almost like because of Paul's education, the Lord utilized him in a way that educates us even today.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it, uh, when it comes to ministry, you kind of started talking about it already, but is there further advice that you would give to someone who's feeling the call of God, who is trying to take those next steps? I love the wisdom that your father had, and it's like, oh, I feel called. I'm going to abandon everything and follow the call. And your dad's like, no, you've made commitments, and then ultimately that helped you. And we're going to talk about that a little later in the conversation. But uh, what sort of advice would you give someone who is feeling the call to ministry and is taking those steps?
Well, you've hit a tremendous, I think, an important topic, and that is, do we, how do we balance a work life, ministry life, all of those family life
Mm,
relationships? And unfortunately, um, being able to have a sustainable job that will provide an income, or being able to have an option to, um, you know, have a skill set. I know Paul made tents that helped
hmm
support his ministry. Um, only uh, frees up a church's finances to be able to better do different things. The
hmm
more, that you are able to help sustain yourself, the less demand that you have to place upon a congregation or a group. And it's not that it's inappropriate to receive funds from what comes into a church, but um, unfortunately, every decision there is a budgetary process to it, whether it's how many missionaries you support, what kind of block party you have, what kind
hmm
of advertisement campaign you have, what kind of giveaways you have, what you do, what kind of facilities you worship in, et
Yes.
cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of those are, in fact, budgetary sort of items. And you're exactly right that any time a person, especially if the door is open, I know you were in a unique position coming from America to Australia. You weren't basically allowed to work for a time period outside of church. It would have been there or nowhere, or however that was for you personally. But I think as the Lord opens the doors, being able to go, you know what, I want to do this to help balance my life. I will tell you, having worked in the secular world and having pastored a church, and it's there were many things I enjoyed about working in the secular job. One of them was that you can clock out at 5 or
Yeah.
clock in at 9, and you don't get calls at home, and you don't have to do this, whatever it is, 24/7. And
Right.
you're not typically interrupted with hospital visits, phone calls, funerals, weddings,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
name it. You're able to kind of sit back and go, that's my day off. And unfortunately, in ministry, as you know, it's all of a sudden, if you're not careful, if you don't maintain some definite boundaries, the walls can crash in, which
Mm.
impacts your ability to be a parent, to be a husband or a spouse, your ability to maintain balance, a healthy balance in all these things. And that's tough at times
hmm
to
Yeah.
maintain that. And so, you
Yeah. That's
know,
so good.
just going to a job and learning those boundaries can help translate into helping you develop other boundaries.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you're touching on this because for our Australian listeners, the vast majority of the people that are going to be getting involved in ministry here, it's not paid, so it's bivocational ministry. The
Sure,
vast majority of it. I mean, you can count on um, you know your hands and your toes the amount of people that are paid full time
sure.
to do ministry in Australia. So yeah, I think that's so important that um, we are committed to secular work as well, and that we're able to find that balance. I like what you touched on when you were talking about boundaries, and that if we can be so committed to ministry that we allow that to override everything else because we got a world to save and you keep
Absolutely.
prioritizing that and that can ultimately be a negative within the family unit within your own life.
Correct. And I think for me, sort of just a little of the shift, when you look at Genesis, the third chapter, it the enemy, the devil, the serpent, shifted Eve's focus from the tree of life, which according to the second chapter was in the midst, which that word means middle of the
Hmm.
garden, and to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which could not have been in the same middle. It could have been next to it, but it wasn't the center point. So the enemy's job was to shift her attention from the good into what you couldn't have. And
Mm.
I think the enemy tries to do that with wherever you are. It meaning, well, if you were successful, if your church was running 300, 200, well, then you would be more successful than somebody whose church is running 50 or who's only ministering to young people. If you were the pastor, you would be. And of course, that's not true. That's
Mm.
just absolutely not factual, um, because we have all been called to work in the field where we are. And so, if you are, and that's the key, it's kind of being faithful over what you've been given,
Right. Right.
and the Lord then opens doors. And so I think that understanding, you know, and if you're working a job, a lot of times you then don't define yourself by your ministry, if you will.
Mm. Yeah.
Well, I'm the youth pastor. It's kind of like a joke that I have heard told, about the man that got offended this year at Christmas time because he's played baby Jesus for the last 47 years. And they finally wanted to get a new baby Jesus, and he was upset, because it's like, okay, that's what I do. I play baby Jesus. And the fact is, you know, the Lord asked Moses, what's in your hand? Use that. The Lord
Hmm.
wants all of us to, whatever He's given us, to use it. And my hat's off to you for using this technology and doing all these things. I mean, it's amazing to me what
Mm.
these new doors that are, people are exploring, whether it's podcast or all of this is exciting because it shows me that people are using what's in front of them. I mean,
Right.
20 years ago, we didn't do podcasts at all. Guess
Yeah.
why? You
It
know,
wasn't in front
so
of you.
exactly, it wasn't there. So, recognizing, and sometimes some of those skills, and I know we've been very fortunate in our local church that we have people that have been trained in skills outside, and they bring that knowledge, they bring that ability, they bring those things to the kingdom to further the kingdom. So, you
Yeah.
know,
And along that vein, how has your training in psychology, getting a master's degree and working in that field, counseling in public and private sector, how has that informed your personal ministry over the years?
well, great question. Of course, the study of psychology is basically the study of the soul. It is how to deal with soul issues, whether it's emotional issues, whether it's the trauma or the drama of things that people have gone through. And there are, uh, as I took my training and got master's and got a specialist degree in that as a psychologist, um, I began to realize that so much of what psychologists were advocating was based in partial truth.
Mm,
And many of them um, took parts of the Bible and used that as the basis for their breakthrough sort of um, therapies, et cetera, and meaning um, whether you talk about hypnosis and trying to go into a deep meditative state. Well, we know that the Holy Ghost is the rest when we speak in tongues, wherewith to cause the weary to rest. And
mm,
so there's something about getting lost in the spirit. You come out feeling refreshed, you come out with a new perspective. There were Rogerian therapy where they, believe in positive self regard. Unfortunately, that's good when it says whatsoever things are pure and lovely and think
mm-hmm.
on these things. There's a biblical truth to that. Where Carl Rogers deviated from truth was he said, we're basically good. Well, we know that we're not really basically
Yeah.
good, but with the Holy Ghost, we can become good because
Mm,
that spirit is transformative. So for me, being able to have that was very helpful. And then as time went on, more and more, I think people begin to accept those degrees and the learning and recognize that there are situations where maybe simply praying about it was not going to be enough.
mm,
Although, truthfully, if we stayed full of the Spirit, stayed full of the presence of God, the Lord can heal all of those wounds and all of the
mm,
past and all of the hurts. But sometimes being able to hear somebody that is able to address situations becomes important. And then to to be candid, a lot of our ministers are being bombarded with a whole new set of questions.
yeah.
How do we deal with people that are struggling with gender dysphoria? Or how do we deal with people that are having issues that are all of a sudden we would have never thought about 10 years ago? And
Yeah,
now
that's true.
they're to the forefront. And
Mm,
so, how do we help our children and how do we deal with our children in school? And so all of those things became, I have found it to be extremely helpful for me
mm,
and
yeah.
extremely wonderful to be able to have sort of at least a level of understanding in that. And there have been a couple of occasions when I have been called on to go to court to testify and on behalf of an individual. And one in particular, I remember they called me as a witness as a pastor, and the defense, uh, rather the prosecuting, uh, uh, began to really pound me about where was your training? How do you're saying this is good for the girl and you're saying
Mm.
this. How do you know that? And when I went through my credentials, he said, "Thank you, you're dismissed." So, so who knows? Maybe for
Uh,
that one case, the Lord
yeah,
used it.
maybe he knows what he's talking about a little bit.
Yeah.
Uh, we've seen over the last few years. I love how you unpacked psychology there and explained it, and I'll be referencing that for time to come. But um, over the last few years, we've seen, especially with the COVID lockdowns, we've seen an uptick in an awareness of mental health, a focus on mental health, and it's made its way into the Apostolic Church as well. You know, people are talking about it more, wanting to know more about it. Do you believe that the Apostolic Church needs to address mental health more frequently and talk about the benefits of counseling? And if so, why or why not?
Um, great question. I don't know that it necessarily needs to be done more frequently. I I presently am the chairman of a group of licensed psychologists, counselors that are also licensed ministers. It's called Points of Refuge. We
Hmm.
have a website and we have a place where they can go. Ministers or wives, whatever, are able to go and sort of get some touch base free stuff. We also have a counseling, it's called Apostolic Counselors, I think, Association or group, and we have several of our people that are on that. And yes, it is an important issue, and yes, there needs to be a level of openness where it is not considered with a negative stigma for
Mm,
you to talk to someone, and that's hard to figure out that balance of that, because some ministers still, you know, have an issue with confidentiality. If I call you, is somebody going to know, or is somebody else going to know about it? And it's kind of the same thing that our people feel at times, and maybe why they don't want to come to the pastor because they don't want the pastor to have to carry that burden. We're fighting.
mm,
I'm embarrassed. I whatever. So I think just being able periodically to recognize, and just what you're doing today, that becomes part of a healthy way, that here it is. It's not the green monster in the closet,
mm.
and let's do it. It's better to get help than not. And, there are those that um, have an understanding of who we are as apostolics, as what we believe. Unfortunately, there are individuals that are trained in the field of psychology that don't want to deal with a spiritual aspect of us. But
Yeah.
that's the same in every field. We have found in the US more and more, I would say, of our medical profession has begun embracing a spiritual sense of it's okay to pray. It's okay to have your pastor come back. It's okay to have that connection because the statistics have proven that
Yeah.
people that have that get better. And so
Yeah.
it's kind of like they're not stupid.
Mhm.
They want their treatments to be successful,
Mhm.
so they're willing to sort of open themselves up to a spiritual um, connection. So I think I don't know that more, but I think it's got to just become easy. sort
Yes.
of.
Yeah, I love that. That's good. Yeah, it just becomes part of the dialogue. It's not something that's off in the corner, but it's actually part of, the dialogue as to what makes us humans and then how we can be healthy physically, emotionally, spiritually. Yeah, I love that.
Correct. And I think probably we were all with the mindset that God can do everything and God
Mm,
can do anything. And, there was a time when um, it was back in the 1940s. I know that I wasn't alive, but I heard stories of people going to prayer meetings and their teeth being filled. And, it
wow.
was like, I can't afford to go to a dentist, and God fill my teeth. I can't verify that or not. I do believe I know God could, I'm sure, heal and fill a tooth or make
Yeah.
a tooth brand new. And
Mm.
yet, most people would not first pray about a toothache. They would probably go to the dentist.
That's
And
right. Yeah.
probably we should still pray about the toothache first. You know, uh, we're still probably under the mindset that, if I'm sick in my physical body, I go to a doctor. And yet there are some that would say, I don't trust doctors. Well,
Mm.
I think mental health is maybe sort of the last one to come
Yeah.
alongside of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I had Dr. Vonnie Marshall on about a month or so ago, and we were talking about it. And she said something similar in that the brain's an organ and it's part of your body. If you have a physical ailment, you're going to go talk to a doctor about it. Yes, you're going to pray. You're going to be in the prayer line. You're going to ask for the elders to pray. God can heal you, but you may also go to a doctor as well. And the same can be said when it comes to mental health. If you are having issues and you need to work through it, talk to someone like yourself who has been well versed in that field and is a soul doctor. I love that. I love how you called it. Basically like a soul doctor. Um, but someone who can help you unpack things and work through things and get you on the right track.
Absolutely. And the Bible is very full of the warts and the failings of the heroes, which is what makes it such a true book, because it doesn't paint them with one broad stroke of, I mean, we see Elijah's depression. We see John the Baptist questioning. We see Samson's failures. We see David's mistakes. There's not one individual that passes through all of this without us seeing all that they went through. And so it's hopeful in that,
Mm,
because it gives us hope that we can be real.
yeah, yeah, and that's what I love about your ministry that you are real. You're very real when you preach. When you're teaching, when you're unpacking a subject, you're dealing with reality, and I think probably some of that has to do with your background in this field. You also you and your wife minister at a lot of family camps or marriage retreats. I know you've done a family camp for us here in Sydney, and we'd love to have you guys back to do another one. But what are some tips that you have for maintaining your marriage when you're involved in ministry in particular? Because that's where, I talked about it a little bit earlier, that's where it can get a little bit hairy if we're struggling with boundaries.
Well, again, awesome. It's great questions. Questions that deserve weeks of study and
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about.
yeah. I know. When
But
I was writing them down, I was like, oh, each one of these could be like an hour long conversation with you, but
correct.
I'm
But
asking you to just put it in like 5-10 minute packages. But
well, but I think some of the things that we've already talked about, such as being able to maintain healthy boundaries, being able to be transparent, being able to set some definite priorities as to what is first. in your life, um, being able to rank things in order. Because if you can't minister to and serve your wife or your husband or your children, and you think I'm going to go serve the youth group or I'm going to serve the church, but I have no willingness to be a servant at home,
Mm.
um, all of those kinds of things. Your family is your first church. It's the first place where you play out your ministry. It is the ultimate relationship between Christ and the church, bride and bridegroom. And so, if I can't be kind to my wife, I
Mm.
I'm upside down if I get up and I'm kind to everybody
Yeah.
in the
So true.
service. And so, kind of recognizing and being willing to listen, get get tune-ups, if you will. And that's kind of what family camp is about, and those kinds of things where we prioritize, reset boundaries, recognize, wow, I need to spend a little more time with this. I need to maintain, um, a little more of uh, kindness, love, etc., etc.
Mm.
And then, recognizing a marriage can never be 50-50. It's you're 100% in all the time. And if
Yeah.
you ever try to be fair, it's not going to work. And
Mm.
if you are trying to minister from a sense of being fair, you're going to get your feelings hurt big time, because people won't treat you fair. People won't be fair. People won't be kind. And so, if you're going to show the love of the Lord, so, you know, unfortunately, it doesn't always happen this way, but anybody who's involved in ministry ought to have the best marriages,
Mm.
home, et cetera, et cetera,
Yeah.
because of that. Now, obviously, without a doubt, I can, if someone is not wanting to live for God, or someone does not choose to, serve God with you, there's not much you can do about that. And I
Right.
recognize that. But ultimately, this is not about them. The first person I have to change is me.
Mm. Yeah, that's
So
good.
anyway, and that's constant. That's constant readjusting, all of that. If
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And the priorities that you're setting for your life, for your family. I love so many different things that you brought out there. That, the first place you're gonna serve is at home. And that when you're married, you're serving one another. My pastor talks about that a lot. Marriage is about serving one another. And if you are consistently prioritizing your spouse and your spouse is doing the same thing, then uh, your marriage is going to go quite well. But yeah, I'll I could take this about 4 or 5 different ways and just spend the rest of the time talking about this subject, but I do wanna, get a couple more things, out of you. You're a wealth of knowledge, and, I'm so blessed to have you on. You've been part of the Apostolic Church for a number of decades. You talked about the capacities in which you served as pastor, home missions pastor, evangelist. You served on national boards, district boards. What excites you about the church in 2022?
Several things excite me about the church in 2022. And a lot of those have to do with things that we have touched on already this evening. The, the willingness of young people to recognize that I can do something, and the tools that are at their disposal, whether it's sending a sending a text message of encouragement to someone, whether it's being connected to a local body serving in some way. We have I think young people that are extremely feel a call on their life to, in fact, engage in their world and in their community. Now, that with everything that is positive, there can be the ditch on the other side of the road, if you will.
Right.
You can find people that are connected to so many things that they are not connected to their local church like they should. That they can listen. Unfortunately, I am old enough to remember when cassette ministry came into play, and it was a big deal. You didn't have to actually go to the camp. You could buy a tape and you could hear the sermon, and people sold them and traded them and made them. And when I came here 19 years ago to pastor, there was a whole room full of cassettes. You
It was the
name
same
it.
here in Sydney.
Yeah,
When I
well,
first moved to Sydney, we had a whole library full of them.
yeah, just and finally it was like, okay, we got to put these in the dumpster somewhere. The room is just exploding because after the cassettes came the videotapes,
Yeah,
and then
VHS. Yeah.
it was like the VHS cassettes, and so while the technology is awesome, just like this, here we are on two sides of the globe, being able to spend a little time together, and I have a tremendous amount of respect and for you and what you're doing and this whole endeavor. And it's exciting to me. That's the exciting part of 2022 is this. And yet I realize that if people just do this and they don't connect to a local group and don't, yes, I can, when I have to log on. When I have to see the service remotely, I understand COVID, whatever the restrictions. But unfortunately, I have seen us lose people through this, meaning, well, I can log on to 3 services and eat my bowl of cereal and never get out of the church and don't put myself out. To how can I pray for someone else? Yes, you can ask me right now. I can raise my hands. I can pray for you electronically, but it's a whole different feeling if I were able to walk in and put my hand on your head and anoint you with oil and put my arm around you and say, let's pray together, Brother Greg. We're going through it.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah.
And so, the awesome thing is that on my phone, I have Greek, Hebrew, 15 or 20 different Bible interpretations from Amplified to King James to New King James to NIV. I can download an app, HG Radio, and listen to sermons 24/7. I can connect, and yet if I am not breaking that down and casting that bread on the water and doing something with it, I almost become fat in the word and lazy because just feed me, feed me, feed me.
Yeah, it can become entertainment if we're not careful. Even like conversations like this can just become entertainment, and there's no transformation that's taking place. There's no introspection, but it's just like, oh, that was nice. That Brother Sjostrand, he's a nice guy. I like what he had to say.
He's a nice guy. That's cool. Where's your next podcast?
Yeah, exactly.
You're right. And yet if it doesn't move me personally to doing something that becomes part of a body, part of a connection, part of the family. There's a verse that says that the body edifies or strengthens itself by the strength not that the head, which we know Christ is the head, but that every joint supplies.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so that where people that come together and are able to help and hold two different, what is a joint? It's that place that holds two different things together. And so being willing to be a joint and strengthen the body, that's the part that I hope that our 2022 doesn't lose.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Yeah, I love that. No, I'm fully on board with that. I had a conversation with a young minister a couple weeks ago on the podcast as well, and it sort of veered in this direction. We were talking more about voices, allowing different voices in our life, and sometimes they can crowd out the voice of your pastor, which you probably didn't have to deal with a lot maybe 20 years ago, but nowadays the pastor's preaching on Sunday, they could be listening to six other ministers throughout the week. And then
Absolutely.
the voice of the pastor tends to fade a little bit. But yeah, that's so good. With the positives, there's also the negatives, and we have to be mindful of that. Now, I like to ask this question to every person who comes on the podcast as we're finishing up here. What is it that drives you, Brother Joshua, when it comes to ministry? What is it that is that driving force for you?
Um, the driving force, I think, for me personally, is that I feel very indebted to the Lord. I know
Mm,
I did not want to go back to graduate school. I was very candid with the Lord when the door opened, and I was asked to teach at the university and go back, and I didn't want to go back, and I basically kind of made this deal with God that, okay, if this is where you really want me, then you're going to have to use it. And, I want it to be done for you.
mm,
So at that time, I had already made that commitment that I want to do what I can for him, and recognizing that whether it's a cricket team or a rugby team or an American soccer team or football or baseball, there are people that bring water, there are people that take care of the equipment, there are people that tape up the ankles, that put tape on the bat, that wash and dry the uniforms, that go to the scoreboard or whatever. And so saying, Lord, let me do something for you. And as long as I feel like I can do something for him, then I feel that, you know, my life is being fulfilled in that manner.
mm,
Obviously, I also, because of my decision to get married, I feel like I have a duty to try to be a good husband. And so I hope that is an area that I have excelled in. And I may feel good about it. You may ask my wife, and she may say, well, he falls short. But that's something I work on, being a good
mm.
dad, being a good grandfather, and then the roles, pastoral, whatever, knowing that my role may change. My role may change tomorrow. And yet, as long as I'm working for him being the
Mm.
Lord, you know, he's going to make it count for something.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Love that. Well, thank you, Brother Joshan, for your time today. Thank you for setting it aside and coming on the podcast. It's been a pleasure for me to chat with you and to have you on.
Likewise.
I like to finish all of these conversations by allowing the guest to have the final word to share a closing word with the audience. So, if you wouldn't mind, Brother Joshan, taking us out from here and sharing a word from the Lord specifically for this podcast. Thank you, bro.
Thank you. I will. Last night we had our local church service, and I I did not have the whole night evening. There were a couple other speakers, and I spoke kind of and wrapped it up. And speaking of all of these different versions on the Bible and things, I just said, I'm going to show you in the Bible where it says, "Don't worry, be happy," which I know is a little famous song that I guess Disney or one of them, Pixar or whatever, came out with that made popular that in their uh, cartoon series. And I just went through um, the Beatitudes, which the Beatitudes in the old King James are blessed is the one, blessed is the one. And yet, if you read that in the Greek, it actually means happy or to be enviably happy. And so, and I just looked at 7 or 8 verses there from verse 3 to verse 8 about how the Lord said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And so when you are poor in spirit, that means you need God. And so blessed are those that need a spiritual touch. They can be happy. You can be happy even being poor in spirit. And if you mourn, you can be happy. And that seems like a dichotomy of words, because you can say, I'm overwhelmed, I'm stressed, I've got all this stuff going on, and yet because of our relationship with God, we have a chance to be blessed, to be happy, to be envied. And whether it's to trust God to meet our needs, to trust God enough to obey Him, those that are seeking righteousness, those that are seeking mercy, have a clear conscience. And you can study through those 7 or 8 verses from verse 3 to verse 10 or 11. And the Lord just kind of said, guess what? In this hour, you're going to have tribulation, but be of good cheer. Why? I've overcome the world. So I know it seems like we are inundated with the spirit of the hour, which is iron and clay, where people can't get along, they're frustrated, they're fighting. You may be blessed in Australia, but in America, you may not have people that, it's just like every newscaster is angry. You have the left that's angry at the right that's angry at the left, and this party that's, and there's just that overfeeling of overwhelming and being sort of inundated in this hour, and stressed, and pressure, and economy, and world wars, and Russia, and you name it, all of these things. And yet in the midst of this, we can be enviably happy. So that the world looks at us and says, there's something about what you have. And I don't mean that we're drugged happy, like on Prozac, but that we really have a joy. We rejoice in the Lord, and we have a joy unspeakable and full of glory. And that's what the presence of God and the body is all about. Being when you come to church and you're able just to sing a few songs, get caught up in heavenly places for a few moments, you need that. And I would tell people that are ministering maybe where the full responsibility is on their shoulders to lead service, plan a time when you can go to Sydney or go somewhere else and just enjoy the presence of the Lord, or enjoy the people of God and rejoice where you're not on call, if you will. Go to the other side, go to Perth, or go wherever, and just go to a church service and get in the presence of the Lord. And if you can't do that, obviously a prayer closet or something, but you've got to connect to His Spirit in this hour, because the only thing that will fight the spirits that we are feeling in this hour of frustration, anger, all of these things. Depression is the peace of God, the love of God, the mercy of God, but it's for us. So we have it. We just have to take a full dose of it.